Welcome to the lecture series, The Essentials of B2B Value-Based Marketing. In this session, we're going to examine the question, what are the sources of customer value? Hi, my name is Jim Narus. I'm going to be your speaker. In marketing, one of our key goals is to differentiate our product or service from the competition. And there's a good reason to do so. If we cannot differentiate our product, it becomes a commodity, and if it's a commodity, we can compete only on price. So there's a tendency of all marketers to try to come up with new and distinctive ways to differentiate their product. Now we're going to do that by adding new sources of value. Now in marketing, when we look at the product and its benefits, we tend to evaluate it in terms of what's referred to as an onion model. And in an onion model, you have a core, which is the key benefit that the customer is seeking. That benefit can be augmented by various layers, which represent new and or alternative services and features that the customer may need. So we're going to turn to the onion model to explain sources of customer value. Now you could argue that marketers typically begin marketing a new product with the features when that product is new to the world and truly innovative. And the reason for this is quite logical. At that point in time, the features are distinctive, so it's easy to get a competitive advantage over our competition. The problem is that over time, the competition will copy our features, and as a result, the product becomes a commodity. If you don't want your product to compete solely on the basis of price, then you need to inject a new source of value. Now, typically the way companies do that is to move away from physical features towards the intangible brand. Now, what do I mean by a brand? Well, a brand is the reputation or image that a product or service has in the minds of a customer that's based on everything that the customer has heard about that particular product, as well as the experiences that he or she has had in using that product in dealing with a particular supplier. Now, it could be argued that the father of modern-day branding was a guy named Richard Woodward, who was the CEO of the Coca-Cola company back in the 1920s. At that point in time, he realized that there were a lot of competitors for colas on the market, and that Coke couldn't compete solely on the basis of the product. Now, along with his marketers and advertising people at the time, they came up with the classic advertising campaign which featured Santa Claus, and these appeared in magazine advertisements as well as in highway billboards. And typically what they showed was an exhausted Santa Claus sitting at a chair in a little boy's house, and instead of milk and cookies, the little boy had left him a Coke and cookies. And typically you see the little boy looking on in amazement at Santa Claus, who's enjoying a Coca-Cola. Now what's going on there is that what Coke tried to do was to link the product with a happy holiday, where kids got presents and everyone is in a cheerful mood. Now, the advantage of doing something like that is that it moves the attention off of the physical towards the brand, which is an intangible. The advantage of an intangible is that it's more difficult to copy. Now, a good example of this is the fact that if you look at most soft drink commercials today, very few of them actually talk about the product and its physical contents. Very few people say we use the best quality cola nuts in the world, or we have the purest water. Instead, the advertisements basically say, hey, drink our soda and you're going to be happy. So the first layer that's added onto the physical features is this intangible brand. Well, the problem with competing on reputation and or image is the fact that over time, people get good at it, and there's little to distinguish you versus your competitors. So, for example, you could argue that both Coke and Pepsi have, more or less outstanding branding campaigns. Therefore, to be successful, you've got to find another point of differentiation, and that leads us to our third layer, which is the customer experience. Now, you hear the word customer experience a lot today because it's an extremely important marketing tool. And basically, it says that value is added by the total experience the customer has in dealing with supplier. And this comes down to service mainly in the form of logistics, such as, is the product delivered on time? Is it high quality? What is the payment process like? As well as follow-up customer service. If you have a problem, does the supplier deal with it? It's a defective product. Do they recall it? What's it like dealing with them? So there's been a shift towards the customer experience, and there's a lot to be done with the customer experience because the services offered by many companies are not particularly up to snuff. Therefore, there's a great opportunity here. Once again, the problem with competing on the customer experience is that over time, everyone copies you, and as a result, even services become commoditized. So I need to move on to something else. And that's often what's referred to as the network. And you get this largely from the social media. Apps such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and the like. Why is it that I would want to use those services? Well, if you talk to an IT professional, there's probably nothing that could not be copied relative to the software that comprises the app. The thing that differentiates them is the network. That is the number of users that are plugged into that particular app. So the value comes from the fact that a customer can gain access to peers of all types. Could be social peers, it could be professional peers with whom they can exchange their experience and knowledge. So here the value comes from the network. Once again, as networks proliferate, they reach the point of diminishing returns, which means that you need to move on to something else. And this is what we're going to refer to as the digital content, particularly as it applies to your website. Now, it's easy, relatively speaking, to get someone to visit your website. The difficulty is making it sticky enough so that they will come back time and time and again. How do I do that? By offering value through added knowledge in that website. As a matter of fact, social media experts argue that you need to become a curator for your product and your industry. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a curator is a term that you typically hear in regards to someone who heads up a museum of one type or another, and his or her job is to determine what goes on display when and how, and when to position it relative to other activities in the community. So in order to become a curator of your product or industry, you have to become known as the leading expert, so that whenever a customer has a question or a problem relative to that category of product, they come to you. And that's what makes your website sticky, that gets people to come back to you. So again, the digital content, that is additional knowledge that the customer seeks, is the final layer that we have represented here. Now, I would point out that over time there's going to be more layers of this. Now, what's important about this concept? Well, there's several things. The first of which is that, unfortunately, traditional B2B marketers tend to be focused in on the features. And unfortunately, after a point in time, all your competitors copy your features, so there's not that much that distinguishes you from everyone else. And you have to add additional sources of value. Now, a couple of wonderful pieces of advice offered by Michael Porter relative to competition is that he says that there is no source of sustainable competitive advantage. And by that, he means that over time, people are going to copy you and duplicate what it is. You constantly have to find other sources of competitive advantage. And he says you need to do that in two ways. The first of which is you have to have competitive advantage from multiple sources. And secondly, you constantly need to come up with new sources of competitive advantage. So when you look at our onion model here, the takeaway is that I can't put all of my eggs in the features basket, that I need to find competitive advantage in each one of these layers. And secondly, I need to constantly update the competitive advantages that I have, because I'm going to reach the point of diminishing returns and I'm going to become a commodity. All right, again, if you want to read more about this, you can look at our management practice book, Value Merchants, or our textbook, Business Market Management. And again, a lot of our research activities that are ongoing are summarized in our research website, engagementb2b.com. Okay, next time we're going to take a look at what research we can conduct to identify the most potent sources of value to our particular customers.